Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. Individuals willing to share their stories, share their experiences of how they gained their sense of identity and sense of belonging. I'd say this every week, and I do mean it every week, that we have a very special guest. And our guest this week is Billy Wong, Professor Billy Wong, who is a professor at Reading University, where he does research and evaluation on access and participation. And he's also a deputy director of postgraduate research studies at Institute of Education. So Billy, I want to just say a very big thank you for being our guest this week. I'm going to start off with my familiar question, which is, can you tell me something about what it is when you were growing up, which gave you your sense of identity, sense of belonging?
Thank you, Wayne, for inviting me. So I was born in Hong Kong, and when I was quite young, around 7, our family migrated to Scotland. And back then, which was in the early 90s, Scotland, especially north of Scotland, where we ended up going to, which is Aberdeen, is not a very diverse place. So we were one of few, maybe 100 people who comes from Hong Kong at that stage. And going to school, I was one of a handful of people who looked like myself. Mm-hmm. So growing up, it was always quite obvious to me that I was very different to everybody around me, and trying to understand the local culture is something which is being a learning curve, because at that age, you're learning about your home culture as well as what goes on in schools. So it's always been quite a different side of me, being me at home when I speak in Cantonese with my family, and then going to school, learning and speaking in English, and trying to pick up all those slangs and those local terms and all those various cultural elements of things. So it's always been quite a divide growing up, trying to accommodate different aspects of the cultures that exist.
So just you mentioned you came across when you were 7.
Yeah.
Do you remember much of your culture pre-7? And how did that impact on you post-7, as it were, or in that transitional phase?
I don't remember that much, to be honest. Okay. I do remember, going to nursery. I mean, the structure there is pretty much the same. I just remember playing, to be honest, when I was in Hong Kong, drawing. I remember getting disciplined for drawing on tables. That's for one thing. And then I only studied for the very first term of primary school in Hong Kong, and I don't have much memory of it. I do remember it's very structured. You have different classes you have to go, and I was always quite a conscious young boy, just trying to follow the rules and not be one of those who challenge authority, so to speak. So back then, it's for me anyway, it felt quite a normal way of going to school.
Okay, so when you came to school, as you said, you were the only child, the only person who looked like you in your school. Did that bother you in any way? Did that kind of like affect you, or was it something which you thought, well, it doesn't matter?
I think when I was at that age, it didn't cross my mind too much. I am aware that I can speak different languages compared to most of my peers at that school, but it didn't really came across to me that I was any, I have to be very different in any way. Yeah. So okay. I just lost my train of thought.
No, that's fine, because I was just thinking about it in terms of you being how accepting were the students of you when you went into this new classroom?
Yeah. So in primary school, I think, to be honest, a lot of the kids there were quite good. I didn't feel that, because of how I look, I was singled out in any way. I was still part of the playing football during the break time, and I didn't feel any different to at least that's how I experienced it. In secondary school, we had a few more people who looks like me, still a handful. And again, I was very fortunate that I haven't encountered too many unhappy experiences. There may be one or two instances of name callings here and there, but these were quite rare. And when they do happen, they were stamped out quite quickly by the teachers to make sure that, this type of name calling or changing people's name to try and be funny is not really acceptable. So I've been quite fortunate in the sense that going through my primary and secondary school, how I look in particular in school at least hasn't really been an unpleasant experience.
So you mentioned there where a teacher called out bad behavior against you. They made it known that this isn't acceptable.
Yeah.
So as a young child, that means you must have felt quite welcomed by the school itself. So what would you say was your relationship with school? Did you enjoy going to school?
I was obsessed with school. So as in a pre-conversation, I was one of those kids who couldn't bear to miss school. I was so determined to go to school that I am unwilling to take holidays during term time. So the example to give is during Lunar New Year, where back in the day, it was quite common for people to fly back, say, to Hong Kong to visit families and stuff. But those times tends to be in the middle of a term, maybe late January or early February. So I remember once saying to my parents, asking me if I want to go back, and I said, no, I don't want to miss school because it'll be at least 2 weeks of school. And I was quite insistent. So that was an interesting thing about me. I was just obsessed that I don't want to miss out anything.
So where did that motivation or that love of school come from? Was it your parents? Did they say school is important? Was it, what other role models? Did you have role models that kind of like inspired you to say, going to school is a good thing? What was it? Do you know?
I don't actually know. Even now, I still don't know. I mean, I don't think my parents were. I mean, they're the one who were asking me if I wanted to take that 2 weeks off to go to Hong Kong. So I don't think they were that insistent that, especially I was back in primary school. It's in hindsight, of course, you don't learn. You're not going to lose that much in 2 weeks in primary school. But I don't actually know. I mean, it's probably linked to my personality and character, where I'm quite a person who likes to follow rules. I don't like, at least when I was young, I follow a lot of the rules. Can't say the same about now, but back in the days, I don't like the idea of having to hand in a slip to tell the teachers that I've missed school or I'm going to miss school. It was one of those idea that going to school is a good thing, and it just never crossed my mind really. And to be honest, I still don't know why. Back in the days, I was very obsessed with making sure I don't miss out on anything.
Mm-hmm. But were your parents encouraging in terms of you to say, were there aspirations that you would stay in school and get a job? What was it that you felt? What was the family influence surrounding education, as it were?
I mean, interesting enough, because I've done research in this area as well, looking into British Chinese, British Indian young people and how the parents plays a role in shaping their life. When I look at those research and doing my own research and then thinking about myself, I don't always see myself as part of that trend, being that my parents never really pushed me in any way in education in terms of making sure that I do my homework or making sure that I study certain subjects or go down a particular pathway or go to university. There was never really any of that pressure, insistence, or even steer that I ought to go down the educational route. And maybe it's because I lacked that. I felt that I should. Maybe that was my own plug in the gaps.
Yeah.
So growing up, it was really a sense of, I knew education was important. I knew that migration to the UK when we were quite young was, the underlying message was so that we get a better opportunity in life. So that may have instilled this idea of education being very important to me at a young age. So rather than my parents needing to push me to go down that route, it was more like I keep pushing myself to ensure that this movement wasn't, it's maximized the potential benefits of moving from one place to another. So yeah.
Did you have any role models? Did you have anyone who you could look up to say, okay, they've done that? Because you've already said that in school you were the only child who looked like you. But what were the role models around you? And were there role models from Hong Kong that you could kind of like hark back to, or were there any role models in your vicinity where you could say, okay, I want to try and follow that person or do something like them?
Yeah, I mean, if there is one model, one role model, it will be my older brother because he was a couple of 3 years older than me.
Mhm.
So obviously he was going through exactly the same as I did, but I get the benefit that he's done it ahead of me in terms of choosing
Yeah.
subjects, applying to university, stuff which we would have fairly little knowledge
Mhm.
or ideas about. So and to be honest, thinking about it, was my brother went on and did computing,
Yeah.
and he did. And I actually almost went down that pathway. So I also studied quite STEM related subjects. I did physics, I did computing equivalents, and then I also did what we called modern studies, which is a similar version of sociology, which I ended up going. So up into the point of studying at the degree level, a lot of the subjects that I have taken are pretty much in alignment with how my brother studied for his equivalents of A level and so on. So my brother's definitely the one which definitely paved the way for me to know what to do. Otherwise, I would have probably struggled even more, I think.
So I'm just wondering, just because you said your brother was the role model and he was slightly older, in discussions with him, how closely did your experience mirror your brother's experience? Did he say things were more difficult, more challenging, and he was able to almost like act as a buffer for you? I'm just wondering.
Interesting. We haven't really talked about that. Maybe I should put that on my list of stuff to do over the holidays. So I think growing up, we didn't really talk about any of the challenges. I think it's more about just, watching television, stuff which is unrelated to education. I don't think we've actually talked too much about education within the household. Maybe it's just a topic that we don't really discuss at all. Even choosing the degree subjects or even choosing study subjects, I don't remember having any deep conversations. I may have probably asked for some advice, but it's not something that sticks in my mind in terms of, us discussing it as a group.
Okay, okay, that's fine. So you said kind of like your brother did computer sciences.
Yeah.
You then did like not general studies, you did that studies which was similar to sociology. You then, when you went to university and picking your choices, you did kind of sociology and philosophy and economics.
Yeah. So that's what I ended up doing, yes.
Yeah. Why those particular subjects?
So sociology was definitely my choice.
Mhm.
The other two was because it was almost like a requirement. So in the system in Scotland, which was free back in the days, still is, hopefully
Yeah.
it maintains that way. You had to choose three social science. If you were doing the social science route, you choose your major or the equivalent, and then you have to choose two more. And the idea behind that was to give people the opportunity to explore their options rather than narrowing down straight away the moment you step in. Because it's 4 years in Scotland, even the second year, you can still narrow down. And then in the third and fourth year, that's what the honors degree comes in. That's when you narrow down to one or two. So for me, apart from sociology, I thought economics is quite fun. It's about numbers. And that was something which I thought to myself at one point is that I might go down that route because economics tends to link to good careers. And obviously, who doesn't want a good career with high paying salaries and so on? And philosophy was just a random pick. I just thought, something that I can learn a little bit more about it. It was fun, but I dropped it after after the first year.
Right. Okay. So then you specialized, but why particularly sociology? What was it about sociology? Because as you said, you did have
Yeah.
that passion as well for the STEM subject. So what was it that kind of like sparked your interest with sociology?
I think it was when in secondary school when we were studying the equivalence of sociology subject. I find myself much more happy, excited, intrigued by the topics that were in discussion when we talk about the health system, the welfare system, the education system, and all the different issues that shapes our experiences. That for me was very fascinating. And that's something which was a dilemma to me actually when I finally chose to study sociology rather than engineering. Was what do I want? Do I want something that I am enjoying, or do I want a discipline that I can foresee a career built into it? Doing engineering, and in Aberdeen, there's a huge industry linked to engineering due to the North Sea, the oil. So there was almost like a pathway set for you if you want to. But I ended up not going down that route because I do want to do something I enjoy, which was a tough decision, believe it or not, back in the day, between being pragmatic about your career, but also being pragmatic about can you sustain that for the next 4 years. And I decided that I do want to continue learning about social issues and social theories to explain and to understand the phenomena and how all these issues are causing us to experience life quite differently because of who we are and how society constructs those structures in place that let our lives unfold in very particular ways.
Fantastic. So you're in the university, you're doing your sociology degree. Did you have any barriers? How was that whole university experience? Did you live it to the full? What was it like for you?
Well, I stayed at home during the university, so I didn't get the residential halls experience, which a lot of my peers did. But I didn't mind that because I still go in. It was quite an easy commute for me. It was only about 15 minutes walk to get to the campus. I mean, sociology is quite a large degree, as in population-wise, but I was definitely the only person of my background, and it was very much female-dominated, as you may expect as well. So in some ways, it's not anything that is surprising to me because I've always felt like I'm the only one anyway. I'm the only one who looks like me. So it's not really anything surprising. The experience was quite good, and I tried to be more open at university, and I did manage to make good friends. But interestingly, the friends that I make at university was actually friends who looked like me, but they were obviously not grew up in Scotland, but they're international students who come from Hong Kong, who come from China, who come from Singapore, other places which they come here and they can speak the languages which I can also speak. And that was quite an interesting shift for me because up until that point, most of my school friends are all are more local friends, from white Scottish friends, and then maybe a couple of mixed heritage friends, but friends which has a very strong identity belonging to Hong Kong, China, or Singapore, or others. Those were quite fresh to me because it was only up until that point that I see so many people who look like me, but they were all studying different subjects, mostly finance, accountants, maybe psychology, but I'm the only person, as far as I knew anyway, who was studying sociology. But I think I have tried to make my experience at university as pleasant as I can. I did, took the step of doing those summer placements abroad. So I did go to Norway for a few months, and then the following year went to America for a few months, doing those summer placement things to try and enrich my CV and so on and so forth. I didn't go crazy, I don't think, but I was definitely more open than I thought I would be in terms of embracing the so-called student culture and what it offers. But I enjoyed my time there, and I felt I've learned a lot, and the staff there were quite good. It was a pleasant experience.
I'm going to just touch on something which based on what you've just said, in terms of that many of the friendship groups which you developed when you were at university were with international students who you had the same shared language. And how did that impact on your sense of who you were? Because having come from that position of being often the only one to now seeing much more of a diverse, or people who look like you, how did that impact you to say, I am not just the only one? Did it have an effect on you?
I think it probably did, in terms of being able to communicate and talk about issues which we shared a lot more in terms of cultures or music, or just what goes on in terms of customs and stuff along those lines. I mean, it's definitely a learning experience to me because it was something which I've never experienced up until that point, where you can have a group of 4 people who can speak in a language I've been speaking at home, and then talking about stuff which you don't tend to talk about with my other peers in terms of the topic and the nature of things. It certainly gave me a bit more of that cultural sense of belonging, linking it back to my heritage, learning more about it at the same time. But I suppose when you're living through it, you don't stop and think and reflect as much as you do now. But
Yeah,
I think it certainly gave me a stronger sense of my, well, the variety of cultures which shapes who I am.
yeah. Okay. So at university, then you also just mentioned about the fact that you embraced it by enriching your experience by going to Norway, going to the US, etc. At what point was it that you thought to yourself, because there's always decision points, at what point was it that you thought to yourself, actually, I think I really enjoy doing this kind of research, this kind of study, and I potentially want to pursue it? How did that come about?
So towards the end of my undergraduate, we all have to start thinking about what next. Am I going to employment and I'm going to continue studying? And at that point, I still haven't got a clear clue about what I wanted to do. So I applied to do postgraduate degrees. And there was two options which I did go for. And again, they're all in Aberdeen. One was in human resources, and the other one was a Master of Research in social sciences. And those were the ones which I thought I could potentially see myself going down. And as for whatever reason, I ended up not going down the HR route because they do actually ask you to pay a small fee to continue to do it for a master's. Whereas for the Master of Research, it was fully subsidized, so I don't have to pay. So it almost felt like I've got another year to buy some time. And research is something that I have an interest in, maybe not a huge one, but it's definitely a potential career pathway. And I know by doing that Masters of Research, the opportunity to go on and do a doctorate was there. It's a pathway. So back then you have this 1+3 model, which I think we sort of still use these days. So that idea was there. So it kind of gave me an option to explore that opportunity. But when I finished undergraduate, it was just a small seed that potentially go down that route or do HR and go down that route of working in HR. But yeah, that was it.
So it was a fairly pragmatic decision.
Yes.
There was two options, but one pragmatically made sense in terms of, I'm not having to necessarily put out an outlay or invest in that sense, but I can still do something which I think I'm going to enjoy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little bit of a sense of what it was that you did for that master's in research and how that relates to the kind of work which you're doing now, and what was the consequence of doing that master's in research study?
So the Master of Research, it's basically a quantitative, a qualitative, and a philosophical strand. It's basically a 1-year degree which taps into how to do research, basically. And I enjoyed it, although I don't remember much of it at this point. But I think at that point in time when I was doing it, it was almost like it's a requirement. It was more like in order to do a PhD, or if you want to go down that route, you do need it. And I suppose having a qualification that is called Master of Research, Social Sciences, potentially opens up some doors to certain positions which probably have the word research or evaluation or whatnot in the title. So in terms of the actual skills, I don't remember much, but what I do recognize is that it's almost like the ticket to entry to other potential pathways. And that's what I kind of moved on to afterwards when I applied for a doctorate, one in Aberdeen, which I was accepted, but they didn't give me a scholarship. So unfortunately, I was thinking really hard. And then I applied for another scholarship at King's College London, which is where I ended up. Now, the interesting story for that one, and I've said it in the past to my other friends, is that the day before I interviewed for the scholarship at King's, I also went for a local interview for a job, which I was offered. So I actually had an offer on the table from the local council to do something linked to research, but it was just a very a normal office job, let's say. So I had the decision that I had to make, whether I would like to stay where I am or take that leap and move to London. because I've been living in Aberdeen at that point for many years now. It's like my home, and I know everything. It felt comfortable, it felt safe. But then the opportunity at King's was almost too good to turn down, because it's got a scholarship, and it's. And thinking further on, if I was thinking about career trajectories, it potentially has a lot more mileage than working in a position which is brand new, created in a local council, which doesn't really have a trajectory or career pathway. Just one position, and then you can't really go up or down. You're just stuck. So I made that decision to take that leap of faith, and that kind of changed my life, really.
So that was a pivotal point. You had an offer on the table.
Yes.
Had a decision to make as to, do I actually leave home, right, and go to London, or do I stay here and have a comfortable job for however long? Yes. You made that decision, and as you said, it changed your life. Explain how it changed your life. What is it that you did on that research or in your PhD, and what it opened you up to?
I think it's just the whole pathway into academia, because I always think to myself, if I stayed and didn't go down the PhD route, what would my life be like? I mean, it will probably be comfortable, stable, but not very exciting, and not very. I wouldn't be so sure whether it would be sufficient to satisfy my curiosity in terms of what I could have done. And it's always one of those decisions where you ask yourself, if you didn't do it, or if you did do it, what would life be? And the reason why I was saying it changed my life is that doing the PhD and going down this new pathway from London onward, it definitely opened me up to things which I have never encountered, never thought I would encounter, nobody around me have ever encountered. It's all new. It's really eye-opening to an extent which you have to really learn things really quickly and try to carve your understanding of the whole thing. It wasn't until I started my PhD that I really understood what Russell Group meant. And to be honest, when I started the King's, I didn't even know King's was part of the Russell Group. It was that knowledge, expansion of knowledge, which you only know by knowing, because you don't know what you don't know. So when I knew about all of these things, learn about these, reading all these things, I'm forcing myself to read, because I'm not actually a vivid reader. I don't like reading, to be honest. But it was one of those things that you kind of have to do. And all the stuff that I've gone on since I started my PhD up until this point, I would find it difficult, the same type of satisfaction, but also feeling of making a difference would exist if I stayed in Aberdeen and continued that profession, because I just wouldn't be sure what kind of career I would end up doing. I might end up doing HR again, because that was kind of the thing which was my partial interest. There's nothing wrong with HR, by the way. It's just that what I was passionate about in terms of sociology, it really feeds into the work that I do now, and has been since I do my PhD.
Right, so give us an insight. Give us an insight of the work that you do now, and what is it about the work you do now which gives you that passion?
So I'll do a quick overview. So my PhD, which was linked to a bigger project, focuses around young people's aspirations to science, and that was a very big project, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And at some points, I've moved on to focus much more on the educational experiences of students at university. And a lot of the satisfaction and meaningful outcomes come from me knowing and understanding and try to use the experiences that has been shared to me through research to make a difference to their actual experiences at university. So for the past 6-7 years, a lot of my work has been focusing on trying to understand from the perspectives of students from underrepresented backgrounds, especially ethnic minorities, what was it like for them to study at university? What worked for them? What kind of factors on their reflections made a difference to their lives? So if they were, and one of the projects that I did was focusing on those who were doing very well, those who were getting first class, trying to unpick and unpack and learn from their experiences. Are there anything in there we can potentially share? Can we amplify what you do? Can we replicate what you do? And that gives a good sense of meaningful feeling that you're not only listening to the experiences of these people who are sharing their stories, you're also trying to use their stories in a way that can potentially help others, and trying to develop ideas that will hopefully make the experiences of others a bit better, a bit smoother, and try to break down the unknown barriers, which is a big problem, I think, in terms of inequalities that we see in education.
So can you give us an example of one of your findings or something which you found, which you thought was really quite profound, something which was, this needs to be, people need to know about this?
I wouldn't say profound. I don't want to make that huge claim, but I think one of the research which we did in the past and it was thankfully picked up in the news, which gave me a lot of confidence, is a notion of asking for help. It's a notion that the fear of asking for help is actually quite a big thing amongst a lot of students, especially those who are unfamiliar with the system. Now, I don't think that's anything new, so to speak. I'm sure if you speak to a lot of tutors, teachers, there will be a host of information, a host of practices. But for me, what we felt like I was making a difference is also recognition by others or the validation of our research by others when you get invitations or you get people asking about you or the public emailing you to share their stories. So a lot of this is about being transparent and managing expectations. So all of these keywords, which might be quite common, to be honest, across within education research, but it made me feel that when you say something, people are listening, at least try to take on board what message you might have, and how can we actually help students to overcome that potential barrier. Either it's because they don't know what to expect from you, or they might have too much pride to ask for help. And that led on to other work around what it means to be a university student and how can we manage expectations. And that is giving me and hopefully the people I work with a sense of that satisfaction that we are making a small difference to hopefully one or two people, if not more, in terms of how they go through the education.
So in terms of just that question that you found that there was barriers because they were potentially reluctant to ask questions. Did you come up with some kind of practical solution as to how to encourage more questioning?
Yeah, there are a few ways. Off the top of my head, I'm sure we've written it more elsewhere. One of them is to reduce optional tutorials. So, and some of these recommendations will depend on your context. So in the context of where I used to teach, at least, we do have lots of tutorials. We do have a lot of these seminars to talk about assignments and so on and so forth. But sometimes these becomes optional in a way that you can come if you have any questions. And usually, as most tutors will say, those who come are probably not the ones who need to come. Those who come are usually the ones who are getting a 2-1 or the first, they just want to get even better. Those who really need to are probably the one who are in that mindset of maybe I don't want to come. So it's making that process of talking about your assessment easier and much more part of the norm. So it's to reduce the stigma of people knocking on your office, reduce the stigma of raising your hand, and you can use other ways to promote questions using, because use of online tools has become so common these days. You can have tools like a Mentimeter or Kahoot or whatever online forms people use these days for people to submit questions, or use a post-it where people can write some questions, put it in a box, and then take it out as a way to conclude the section. Is to think of just alternative ways to recognize the diversity of approaches that people learn. And just sticking to one approach is probably not going to reach the broadest audience. You might reach the majority, but that's where the issue of being quite dynamic in our teaching comes into play, is to try and recognize the different ways people learn. And sometimes people like to learn by being quite quiet, and sometimes that's okay. But what we don't want to happen is a situation where students would benefit a lot if they really talked about it, but they don't feel empowered to ask those queries. And it's about testing out different ways. And it might be an online forum, it might be anonymous forums, it could be many ways. And it is really about trying and testing, see what works in your context and what works for your cohort. And maybe as student mentors that is required to promote that discussion. Maybe talking to staff initially isn't the best way, in which case use of fellow students, create little groups, or at least facilitate little groups and see how that goes. So, and I'm sure, at Imperial, there are plenty of other resources and support that allows people to try out different methods. But for me, in terms of what we've been doing, these are the sort of suggestions we've been given, but it will depend on your context.
Right. So it's about removing some of the barriers for those students who potentially may feel just to go up and ask a question isn't an option. Yeah, it shows a sign of weakness. So you level. I'm not going to say level the playing field, but you remove the obstacles which are potentially in their pathway.
Yeah.
So when was it that you transitioned from because you were at King's, but now you're at Reading?
Yeah.
What was the decision making process, and how did that come about?
Great question. It was a very difficult decision, actually. So when I was at King's, I completed my doctorate. I was doing a postdoc there. I was involved in a long project. So I've got a fixed term 5-year contract. I left just under a year to another position at just outside of London for a full-time position as a lecturer. That itself was a really tough decision because at that moment you're in a big project, you're making a lot of good research along those lines, but then the pragmatic side of me comes in because at some point you want to feel, well, when I say at some point, fairly early on, I want to feel that sense of financial security. And when you're in a fixed term position, you always, for me anyway, you always wonder what happens next. And you always wonder, am I missing out if I don't apply for more secure positions? Now, when I say secure, it's not really secure. Things do change. But at that moment in time, all that was in my mind was if I want to get a mortgage, I need to have a job that allows me to get a mortgage. So it was a difficult decision that I had to leave that project officially at least, and then move on to Roehampton, which was my next position. And then at Roehampton, met great people, great colleagues, but unfortunately, I was unsuccessful in my promotion bids, which was a real incentive for me to start looking around because I did felt quite annoyed, maybe upset that my value wasn't recognized and rewarded in the same way as others have. So that really pushed me to look. And thankfully, Reading had a couple of positions. The first one I didn't get, but they did write a really lovely email to appreciate me and let me know actually there might be something else coming up very soon. And it did. So I applied and I went for it. And thankfully, I was offered the position there. And that was back in 2017. So I've been there at 6 years, and it's been an interesting journey. So each time when I move, I felt like there was other factors beyond just looking, beyond just moving for the sake of moving. But I would like to think I'm relatively settled at the moment.
Okay, fantastic. So it's kind of like going back to this pragmatic feel, right? The pragmatic feel. So many of the decisions are based on, I need security, but I also at the same time I need to feel valued.
Yes.
Yeah. I can have security, but if I don't feel valued, I still necessarily don't feel as though I belong. I
think that's a very fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. So pragmatically, you went looking, and just that letter, it's really quite something which you just said. That letter which said, we really appreciate, although you weren't successful, there's something in the future, please consider applying again, which is what you did. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I have a little bugbear about the fact that if someone has gone for an interview and then whatever else, I do feel that they've spent time investing in your organization. So the least that you can do is give them some feedback as to why either they've got the position or they haven't got the position. I just think that that's just a decent thing to do. But it was them showing or recognizing your value, which then helped you to decide, oh, I want to apply there again. I want to try again.
Yeah.
All right. So how do you feel that you add value to where you are now?
I would like to think that my contributions to my department is to strengthen the research profiles of my department. I'm one of many researchers in my department, and everyone has their different roles. But at the moment, my role is not just to my department, but to the university, something which I've taken on for the last 18 months in particular. But I like to think that, I contribute in a variety of ways, especially research around higher education, which there's a few of us, but not a big number who does this research. And with a greater shift in the university to ensure that our student experiences are also catered for, I do feel that it's quite timely in many ways. The priorities of the institution is more and more in alignment with the research that I have been doing, which is a good thing because it means that you've got more opportunities in some ways to be involved in different working groups, different steering groups, to share your experiences, share your expertise. And a fair bit of that will also depend on luck and timing. Because if certain things happens here, over there, and if that happens to fall into your realm of expertise, then that's your opportunity, that's your break, really.
Yeah.
And I've definitely had one or two of those opportunities to break. Not that I've taken them all with both hands, but I definitely feel that in the last 3 or 4 years, I've had a lot more opportunities than I did for the previous 10. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's just the power of the internet, the power of open access, or the power of social media, where your work or your profile might have reached further than you thought it would. Yeah.
So I'm just looking at the title which I got, which was professor at the University of Reading, but also director at the Institute of Education. Is it the Institute of Education in Reading, or is it I'm thinking of the one in Central?
It's the one in Reading.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. But you feel that you're adding value. What would you how would you advise your students, or in terms of, let me backtrack. Do you gain a sense of belonging in your current role in what you do?
I think I do. I mean, one of the things which really touched me, let's say, is so when at Reading in my early days, I was quite fortunate. I was successful in a small research grant, and not long after that, the head of school knocked in my office, came in and congratulated me. I was in shock, but also quite happy, because that never happens in my previous place. The head of school never comes and talks to you. You might not think an email. So I was really surprised at that culture, which I believe is the way of things at that place, at the place where I'm working at. That it's those little things that really matters. That little message, that little knock on the door, that little congratulations face to face. And it really made me felt that people are really passionate about what they do. And the notion of belonging, you can dissect it in many, many ways, and the different levels depending on, the context. But I think all in all, the whole institution and the way they do things, I do feel it's very much in alignment to my values, the way they do things. I know that can't be said for every institution or even every department, but I do genuinely feel that people have the right mindset, or at least they want to do the right thing, and the way they do it is not any different to the way I do it, maybe even better. So it's not something that is that far off in terms of how they do things, in terms of sharing information, being transparent as much as they can, being open about the challenges, let people in, conversations as thoroughly as viable, reasonable, rather than just dumping information out of nowhere. I mean, those things may happen now and again, but for the past 6, 7 years, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like they have the good intentions. So yeah, I mean, not selling running, but they're a good place to work with if anyone is looking.
All right, you heard it here first, guys. You heard it here first. That's great. I'm just wondering if because we have got an audience with us, if there's any questions from the audience which anyone would like to ask, then now's your opportunity. Otherwise, I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we look to close. Okay, so one of the next questions: where do you see your research, or how do you see your research being impactful and making a difference?
Good question. Need to start thinking about that with the next breath. I think it's, for me, at the moment, I suppose, in addition to writing research proposals, writing research papers, publishing, it's also to hopefully try and share and disseminate to a wider range of audiences, and speaking to other universities, speaking to organizations with an interest in education, for me, at least in the last few months in particular, felt quite a different approach to make a difference. Because in academic research, we always think about impact, or at least in education, we always have to think about impact. Is it just about how much you publish, how much research you do? More and more, it's about who are you talking to, and are those people that you're talking to able to take away your message into their practice? And that has been that is going to be one of the things that I hope to do more going into the next few years, because I think that is something which I haven't done enough of, and I've been more reactive than proactive. And it's something that I need to learn more from others to how to do it in the best possible way, without burning up myself. But there's always that balance between what can you do as an individual, but also, what's viable in your other commitments.
My final question on these before I go to my final question, just in terms of when you talk about the impact, I wonder to myself sometimes that when we do research in higher education, how impactful is that for societal benefit? Are people outside of the academic sphere actually hearing, engaging, and understanding the work which we're doing? So how are you doing or going about making sure that people who have a similar background, who may never have gone to university, etc., are then thinking to themselves, actually, it could be a place for me? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's a tough one, and it's about the channels of communication. And I mean, one channel which I always felt to reach a broader audience will be the media. Maybe not social media per se, because you tend to be in your little bubble, but national media, and a range of them, not just certain media, because each media has their own sort of audience. So I think it's about trying to engage with a range of media as one way to share information, especially those who will not typically be reading articles, who will not typically read blogs. But it's definitely something which I think more work needs to be done, and it's something that I've been thinking more and more when I plan my research for the next few years. Is how do you rightly say that, when how do you reach non-academic audience, and how can not just non-academic, but people who just might not be interested normally into your work? And the only solution I can think of so far is around media in a very broad way, assuming they consume any form of media. And it's about us trying to tap into a whole range of different medias, whether it's media organizations or just type of media, in print, in video, in audio. And that's why I've been trying to be more open to myself. I not signed up, but I've done one of those BBC radio things, which I was petrified in the sense of doing that kind of thing live. But it's something which I'm trying to do, and trying to accustom myself to be much more diverse in how I communicate and share my knowledge beyond just writing papers, which, while it's becoming more and more comfortable because I've been writing for many, many years, other type of communication is something which I'm still learning and trying to feel comfortable with.
Fantastic. So, right, we've come to the final question, and it's that double header. And it's the question of what advice would you give to your younger self? And on the opposite side of that, what do you think your younger self would look at you now and say, wow?
So, advice to my younger self. So I will use my younger self in the age of 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
I would say to him, don't be too obsessed with education, especially at that stage. I will probably say to my younger self to be maybe less rational, because I think at a young age I've been so rational in the way I think, being very pragmatic, which in some ways I still am, but just be more adventurous, maybe take a little bit more risk. And I can only say that because I haven't taken much risk, but if it's my younger self, I can say maybe be even more adventurous, take a little bit more risk, try a few more things, in terms of your hobbies and stuff that you do, and maybe learn to love reading, because that's going to help my life a lot now, because reading is never my forte. I've always struggled to focus reading beyond a certain time, which is interesting because doing a doctorate and going into academia entails of reading. It's almost like I deliberately designed a path for myself to torture myself forever to make sure that I don't let go on that. The second question is, what would my younger self say to me now? I think a 7-year-old me would be very surprised that I am doing this academia, because at that age, I would have got no understanding of what academia is, no understanding of education, especially that the fact that, being an academic means reading a lot. And as I said, I don't read a lot. I think my younger self would be surprised that I am not doing something which makes a lot of money, because I think when you're young, you always envisioned, doing a job that makes you lots of money. At least when I was 7, that was what I was thinking. So I think my younger self would be very surprised at what I am doing now. Even my teenage self would probably be quite surprised at what I ended up doing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Billy, it's been wonderful having you on. And we're looking forward to reading some more of your work, especially about the identity and belonging within higher education, because especially for minoritized groups, I think the more that we understand and the more that we can try to change the landscape in the things that we do to make it much more of an inclusive environment, I think long-term society will benefit from having people who feel that they have that sense that I belong here. So I want to just say another really big thank you for being.
Thank you to you too. Thank you.
I'm going to just advertise what's coming up, and then let me just pull this to one side. Yeah, just let everyone know what's on for next week. Well, not next week. Okay. So we're taking a break next week, and I'll explain why. But in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have Professor Giles Yeo, and he's a professor of molecular neuroendocrinology at the MRC Metabolic Disease Unit, and he's scientific director of genomics and transcriptomics core at Cambridge University. So we're going to be having him on the 6th of October. And the reason for that is because next week we're going to be having the Beyond Ethnicity Career Conference, which is an all-day event at Imperial College, where we'll be, amongst others, we'll have Eric Collins as our guest, and he's written a book called We Don't Need Permission. So come along and hear what he has to say, as well as joining in with our workshops, looking at how we look at the barriers of progress in academic life, in our professional lives. So that's going to be a really good lecture conference next week. If you have missed any of our previous belonging interviews, then please go to our URL, our YouTube, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and you'll be able to see our other 150 guests which we've had on belonging. And it's just for me now to say another really big thank you to all of those 150 guests who we've got. This is the first 100. I'm compiling the second 50 for the second 100, but it's been wonderful hearing their experiences of how they have gained their sense of identity and sense of belonging. So until 2 weeks' time on the 6th, if I don't see you in person at the Careers Conference, have a good week, have a good couple of weeks. Thank you. Just